Hey everybody, Danielle Hargenrader here, and welcome to another episode of Unleash Your Inner Diabetes Dominator. Today, I have a really awesome guest who is definitely a diabetes dominator. I'm going to read you his bio like we always do, and we're going to get right into his story. At the age of 36, Andy Holder, aka Iron Andy, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. This came with no family history and no warning. Being a husband and a father of two young boys, he was determined to overcome this disease, and he was not going to let it limit his life. He decided to do something extraordinary in an effort to motivate and inspire other people struggling with diabetes. Despite never having done a triathlon before at all and not knowing how to swim, Andy decided to accomplish what most consider to be the ultimate test of mental and physical endurance, the Ironman triathlon. Andy had a positive attitude, and he put in a lot of hard work and a can't stop, won't stop mentality. And he is now a 7-time Ironman finisher. He's a national spokesperson for diabetes awareness and has recently created the Iron Andy Foundation, whose mission is to send children to diabetes camps and empower them to live an extraordinary life in the face of this disease. He is often the keynote speaker at health and fitness expos, universities, medical centers, and corporate sales meetings. So that's quite an impressive bio. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you today, Andy?
I'm great, Danielle. Thank you. Thank you. I need to update that bio because I'm an 8-time Ironman triathlon.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so 8 times.
Yes.
As if 7 times just wasn't enough. You had to add another one. Yeah. So yeah, as we always do here, we want to know about you. So obviously, tell us about your story of diagnosis and how you went from never doing a triathlon before to be an 8-time, winner. Tell us about that progression.
Sure. Yeah. So I was diagnosed a little bit later in life. LADA is the term, and I didn't even know that term at the time. But I was 35. My wife and I had just had our second son, and I went to get more life insurance. And when the blood work came back, routine, underwriting blood work. We already had insurance through this particular carrier. They were denying me. And they said it was because my A1C was 6.0 and my fasting blood sugar was 120. At the time, I had no idea what A1C meant. And I thought that there must be something wrong here. So I went to my doctor, I got retested. And what he told me was that, you don't fit the profile for type 2 diabetes, because even though I was 35 and I wasn't a triathlete yet, I was actually a competitive drug-free bodybuilder. So I was in very good shape. So type 2 wasn't even a thought. And being 35, I didn't think you can get type 1. So he said, he prescribed the blood sugar meter, and he said, test your blood sugar a couple times a week and come back in a few months. And I went back in a few months, and he did my blood work again, and my A1C was like 13 and change.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think what was happening was, I guess the first underwriting blood work, it was just coming on. The disease was just manifesting itself. And I think, thankfully, I look back on, it was kind of a nice red flag, that came up, that I was able to go get the testing done. And, he said, I think you have type 1 diabetes. You need to go see an endocrinologist, which is what I did. And sure enough, life changing.
Yeah, I'd say life changing is an understatement.
Yeah.
So obviously, if you're already a competitive, natural bodybuilder, that's a lot of effort. So what made you decide to make the switch between competitive bodybuilding to Ironman? Like, what was the catalyst for that?
Yeah, great question. So it was interesting. One of my good friends, in referring to the drug-free bodybuilding, and I keep saying drug-free because when you're not taking steroids, a lot of what you're doing to manipulate your body for competition day is around diet and carb counting. And one friend of mine said, it's almost like you've been training for this, training for disease. Yeah, and counting carbs, but I just remember it certainly was a shock. I was in denial for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, which is pretty much how I work through things pretty quickly. But I remember actually being on the phone with my wife. I was driving back from the doctor's office, and she was crying and I was crying, and I didn't remember this at the time, but a little bit later on, I was the honoree of the Philadelphia JDRF Gala Promise Ball. And I had to give a little speech, and she had to intro me, and she mentioned this in the intro, that during that conversation on the phone, I said to her, I guess to console her because she was so upset, was, I'm going to make something good out of this. Now, I didn't necessarily know what it was at the time, but I just knew that I wasn't going to let this get the better of me, change my life in any way. None of us asked for this. I certainly didn't, but all you can deal with is, what are you going to do next? I couldn't get rid of it. I couldn't change it. How am I going to react to it? So I couple of days later, I remember being in my kitchen, and you, I don't know, everybody else out there listening, if they remember the first time you were actually giving yourself shots of insulin, kind of a weird experience when you're not at the doctor's anymore. And I was in my kitchen. I remember I had all the stuff laid out, you know, the syringe and the insulin vial and the alcohol wipes and everything that we have, all the stuff that we have as folks with diabetes. And I was getting ready to give myself an injection of insulin, and it was almost like an out-of-body experience. Like, how did I get here? Like, how did this happen? You know, like the whirlwind of the diagnosis happened so fast, and here I am in the moment of, wow, this is the rest of my life. I'm going to be giving myself injections. Wasn't thinking about a pump at the time, but you know, this is kind of weird. And while I was having this, like I said, kind of introspective moment, I noticed that my 2-year-old son was just kind of watching me. He was looking up at me, watching me prepare the insulin, prepare the shot. And it hit me right there in that moment that for the 5 minutes that I was going to start to feel sorry for myself, I said I couldn't afford to do that, because this wasn't just my disease and it wasn't just affecting me, but it was going to have a profound effect and impact on him and his little brother and my wife. And it was in that moment that I realized, you know what, I can't get rid of this. I can't change it, but I can control what I do next. And the only thing that I can control is my attitude. And that's pretty much how I spent the next 10 years, you know, as Iron Andy, just trying to get people to understand things happen in our lives that we can't control, we didn't ask for. You really need to focus on what you can control. And with a relentless disease like type 1 diabetes, where it's in your face 24/7, there are very little things that you have complete control of, but your attitude is always one.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what, I'm gonna try to do something extraordinary to show him that things are gonna happen in your life, and hopefully they don't get diabetes, but they're gonna have some adversity to deal with. And I wanted them to grow up with a dad who wasn't weak and sick and diseased, but a dad who was extraordinary. And
absolutely. I was going to say, I'm a big proponent. One of my things, you know, I say this all the time, is that we all have the ability to turn any adversity into an advantage. It doesn't matter what the adversity is. Like you said, we are all going to face adversity. That's part of life. That's actually what I think builds character. And I think that when we choose to turn that adversity into something advantageous, whether it's to set a good example for a child or someone in our lives, or just to show ourselves that we have that ability to control our actions, what comes of it ends up being something even greater than we could have ever imagined, which it seems like you had that experience as well.
Yeah. And when it's something as big as diabetes, if you can, I say overcome, that might not be the right word, because I mean, you're never overcoming it, but you're thriving in the face of it. And then when other little life adversities come your way, it's easy. That's at least how I found it. I mean, this is the biggest obstacle that I've ever had to deal with. And you know, by thriving in the face of it, it's made it easier to handle other things. And that's kind of the message that I would try to get across to people is, you know what, you have it, deal with it, and figure out how you're going to turn it into a positive. And kind of in that whole moment of my son and thinking about this and thinking about doing something extraordinary, kind of like my life flashed before me. And I thought about how important being an athlete in sports was in my life, and how it molded me and it built my character. And when you're in a moment like that and you're trying to grab onto some strength and courage, you can't help but think about, well, what got me to where I am today? Like, what built my character, and what are some of the examples that I could draw on, experiences that got me to where I was? And sports was such a big part of it. And I thought about, well, wow, you know, what about kids that are getting diagnosed with this disease? Because I was 35. And that really bothered me, because I thought if I had been diagnosed, and I could have been, I mean, why 35 and not 5? That would have drastically changed the course of my life and the person that I became. So it was in that moment that not only for my sons, but I wanted to do something to inspire kids, to bring hope and comfort to their parents. So by my actions, they could look at what I do and say, you know what, my kid's going to be okay. Look what this guy's doing. You know, he's got a mortgage and he's, you know, just trying to get through life, and now he has this disease. And oh, by the way, despite not knowing how to swim and never doing a triathlon before, he becomes an Ironman. So yes, a little extreme, but I thought if I could do something way up here, then people could see that and feel like, you know what, I'm going to be okay, or my child is going to be okay. They can do some pretty great things.
So just out of curiosity, from a standpoint of somebody who's athletic, but the thought of doing an Ironman is just like absolutely out of the question for me, certainly right now. What was the time frame between deciding that you were going to do an Ironman to actually learning how to swim and then doing it?
Yeah, it was, I guess, pretty quick on a relative basis. I mean, again, I was an athlete, so I wasn't, like a couch potato, but there's a big difference between like the weightlifting, bodybuilding.
It's all endurance. I mean, what you went from one, I mean, that's crazy. Yeah.
I was the opposite. I mean, I wrestled in college, played football in college. So my sports were always the opposite of, I wasn't on the cross country team, put it that way. So, and I picked Ironman. I don't know if I addressed your original question, because it was the most extreme thing that I could think to do that you can just go do. Like, you can't just get into the Olympics. You can't just go be a professional athlete. Anybody in their right mind
sort of
for an Ironman. So I thought, well, let me do that. And I kind of worked backwards. I signed up for it. I hired a coach, and then I was like, okay, wait a second. How am I gonna do this? How am I gonna figure it out? And I remember the very first day I was in the pool. And when I say, I've had to qualify this over the years a lot. When I say I didn't know how to swim, I wasn't somebody who, if I happened to fall into a pool, that I'd be like, oh, I'm drowning. That wasn't me at all. But my experience in a pool was, hanging out, swim up to the swim up bar in Club Med, or just kind of like doing this under the water. I never really did a lap before. I wasn't on the swim team. I didn't know how to breathe. I didn't know any of that. And the very first swimming practice I had on my own, I joined a Y, and I got in. I'm like, all right, well, how hard can this be? You just kind of like do this with your arms, and then you're at the other end, you turn around, you come back. And I got almost one length of, almost to the other side. And thankfully I started at the deep end, because by the time I got to the wall, I couldn't breathe. Yeah. And I actually had to stop, and I'm standing. Thankfully I was not in the deep end. And I remember thinking, how am I going to swim 2.4 miles? That was 25 yards. And I just kind of put my head down, got back in the water, and did 2 laps. And then the next time out, I did 10 laps, and, just kind of worked at it. And because I already had the goal set of Ironman for a bigger reason, it was just, well, I got to get there, so stop sweating the little things. It's kind of like, it's almost like a metaphor with diabetes. I mean, yes, I want a great A1C. I want to be healthy. I don't want any complications. Well, how do you do that? Well, you test your blood sugar, you count your carbs, and you do all the things, the little steps that you need to do to get you to that bigger goal. And, I don't know that I realized it at the time, but Ironman was a perfect metaphor for me to deal with diabetes.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really great analogy, is that, and I talk about this all the time. It's sometimes, with diabetes, you don't know what's going on. And even if you're making great choices, sometimes you still have fluctuating blood sugar. So it's like, sometimes you just got to take it one blood sugar at a time. What's my blood sugar now? Assess it. What could have caused this? And then make the next best choice. And it's one by one by one. And all those little things, like you said, build up to that great A1C. And I think that's a great lesson for anything in life, anything that you want to accomplish that you haven't really gotten to before, is to just take it one step at a time. And having that bigger picture off in the distance is really kind of, I think, a huge part of that, because like you said, you actually signed up for the Ironman already. I tell people, build yourself in some accountability, put it out on social media that you're aiming for X, Y, and Z, and then, work backwards from that, because that's the why. The why is because you already made it known to people that you were going to do this, and yourself, that you were going to do this this Ironman thing. And, if you want to have a great O&C, it's like, tell the diabetes community, we're all out here. I mean, there's only 1 million, pages, social media, Facebook, 2 Diabetes, whatever it is. Go out there and tell a bunch of people that this is what you want, and then kind of work backwards, but build in that accountability by actually having that big goal at the end, and then take it step by step. That's fantastic advice. I couldn't agree with you.
Yeah. And I actually remember telling my wife that I was going to do Ironman, and she says, I've never seen you swim. Well, I guess I'm going to have to learn. But so your question about how long, so diagnosed in the spring, I guess. I had signed up for a half Ironman in that following October. So it was about 4 months from 0 to a half Ironman, which is pretty, I mean, that's, 1.2 mile swim, 56 bike, and then a half marathon. But the 1.2 mile swim, that's a lot for someone who's never swam before. And then my first Ironman was the following year. So it was about a year from crazy idea to actually, I ran the Boston Marathon in April, and then Ironman Lake Placid in July. So a little over a year from, yeah.
As I say, that's just, it goes to show people. I mean, I've worked with clients where their A1C has gone down 3+% in 3 months. And my point of that is that people don't realize that if you really dedicate yourself to something and you stay consistent and you keep that bigger picture in mind, you can get somewhere that you thought you might never be in a much quicker period of time than you might believe. And I think that, you doing that Ironman is just, it's like 1 year. That's just, to me, it's not my goal right now, but I would imagine it would take me at minimum a year to prepare for something like that. So that's pretty amazing. So now you're not necessarily Iron Andy anymore. Obviously you're always going to be Iron Andy. What do you do now? Obviously you're still athletic. What do you do now that you're not necessarily always training for an Ironman? What's your workout routine like?
Well, now it's all about not getting fat. That's the goal. It's a smaller goal, I guess, than Ironman, a little bit more humble, but probably a little bit more identifiable. I mean, I picked Ironman because I wanted to do something extreme, and I was always sensitive to the fact that I never wanted somebody to be like, well, I'm never going to do an Ironman, and then just kind of be turned off and not inspired, not motivated. I even used that as part of my message in that, sometimes we look at, like, and I'm not using this negative, like a Gary Hall, I mean, that's way up there, Olympic swimmer, diabetes. And if the person that you're looking at for inspiration is just so far out of the realm, sometimes it almost works in an opposite. It's like, well, I can never do that. He's an Olympic swimmer. So I always played up the fact that I just a regular guy with a wife and kids and a mortgage and a job. And now I have this disease, and look at the amazing things that I've done. So I try to always keep it identifiable. And I think even more so now, it's even more, because I'm just a regular guy. I work for Insulet. I'm a territory sales manager for Omnipod, and just trying to get through the day and exercise and eat right. And the goals aren't as lofty, but it's just as challenging, if not more challenging, to just stay in shape.
Yeah, I love that you said that. What's your goal now? Just not to get fat. No, I mean, I think, but it's funny because it's true. It's relatable. It's like everybody kind of has, no matter what you're training for or what goal you're trying to hit, that's, I think, everybody's goal. I think, or to kind of come away from that, because we know that can lead to a lot more complications, not just diabetes complications, but everything else under the sun. So I think that's awesome. And I'm glad you mentioned the Insulet, because I was going to bring that up. So I'm assuming, and I hope that I'm not wrong here, that you use an Omnipod. Is that correct? Are you an Omnipod?
That would be weird, right? If I didn't. Yeah. I find myself when I talk to, like, parents where, their child wants to go on Omnipod, and they call me, and when I tell them right out of the gate, hey, I have type 1, I have this disease, I know what your son is going through, your daughter's going through, and that's always comforting for them. And every once in a while I'll get, oh, are you on Omnipod? I'm like, well, yeah. So I am, and I have to tell you, I wish that I was on Omnipod back when I was doing Ironman, because I wasn't. I mean, I was on, other pumps, and never really realized the effect that, like, being disconnected from my basal while I'm swimming for an hour, 20 minutes has on my blood sugar for the rest of the day. So yes, I am on Omnipod, loving every minute of it. But yeah, so it's figuring out how to have diabetes and train for Ironman. And I mean, we can spend an hour talking about how difficult that is. To me, it was always like, just get through the race. I never, you called me an 8-time Ironman winner. I wish I was never a winner. Well, I was a winner because I finished everyone, but it was really just about every time I crossed the finish line, that was, a handful more people that I was able to inspire. I never had any delusions that I was gonna win a race. Actually, I do remember I was traveling a lot. My old job, I was a national spokesperson for a big pharmaceutical distributor company, and I used to travel around the country just speaking and racing and doing appearances and meeting people. And I was in a 5K in Jonesboro, Arkansas, and I actually won my age group. And I came home with this little tiny trophy like you would get in Little League. And my youngest son, I forget how old he was at the time, he was like, he said, well, how can you never win any of these Ironman? Like, he just couldn't get the fact that I could win this running race, but why can't I win an Ironman? It's like, well,
okay, Ironman, just a bit of a difference there. So you obviously wanted to show your sons that living with diabetes or any type of adversity wasn't going to be the reason why you weren't living your life to the fullest. Now that your sons are older, do you feel that they have received that message clearly?
That's such a great question, because when I used to do like keynote speeches, I would always talk about when they were younger, much younger, they're 11 and a half and 13 now. They just always to them, somebody who was exercising, working out, training, doing Ironman had diabetes. And I mean, there were a couple of situations. Once we were just driving to my in-laws' house, and we were driving past a person who was jogging in the street. And my one said, look, Dad, that person has diabetes. And that sounds like made up, but I have probably a dozen stories like that where to them, that's what diabetes was. And I was like, well, I've won then, because if that's the message that I've instilled in them, I don't know so much now that they're a little bit older, and I don't know. I don't know if they're still impressed by me, maybe because they're, teenagers and pre-teenagers. But I do know that it had a huge impact on them growing up. Like, they really thought that having diabetes meant swimming, biking, and running.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So so your kids just assume anytime they see anybody doing something athletically awesome that they had diabetes. That's probably.
Yeah, I think they're smarter now. They realized that that's not the case, but I'm sure it still has had a positive impact on them. And who knows if we're having a positive impact on our kids, hopefully. But I when they were younger, it was a big deal. And if anybody would ever ask, what did your dad do? Oh, he's Iron Andy. Like, to them, it was all one thing, diabetes, Iron Andy, triathlon, Ironman. It was all.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. So why don't you tell us a little bit, you're working on anything new? So obviously you're doing the Insulet, the Omnipod thing, and obviously people who watch my interviews know I'm a big Omnipod fan. That's the pump, the only pump I've ever used, just because I was unwilling to be tethered. That was never even, and that's a personal choice. I always tell people, something works for you, fantastic, use it to your advantage. We have so many options in technology nowadays. But what else are you working on other than the Omnipod thing? Are you coming up on any new? Are you doing any more Ironmans? Do you have any plans for more athletic accomplishments? No,
I haven't had a press release or a press conference yet, but no. So interestingly enough, my circle of like really close friends, like my one brother-in-law, a couple of really good friends in my community, they call me the Godfather of Ironman because they all now do Ironman, and there's probably a dozen or so guys that have become triathletes and Ironman just based on watching me. So I've had this trickle down effect with them. And the funny thing about it is when I was doing it, I was by myself. I was training by myself. I was doing all my 6-hour, bike rides by myself. And now they all work out together, and they're this cool little group of triathletes, and they're always trying to talk me into getting back into something. I can say with pretty good certainty that I will probably not do an Ironman again, but I don't know, maybe see myself doing something shorter.
Yeah. Okay. We'll take it. I'll take it.
I don't know if this is a positive thing to say or not, but it really was always just a means to an end. I mean, I never, obviously starting at 35, I wasn't like a triathlete that I always had this burning desire to be a triathlete. I wasn't a swimmer in college. It was just, how do I inspire people? Well, go do an Ironman.
I think that's a very positive thing to say. I think that's even more kind of, a bigger point to be made is that you don't have to have this long time burning dream to accomplish something. If you just get the spark lit under you and you have the motivation, you can pretty much do anything. I think that's a really great, message in general. You don't have to be deciding your whole life, I want to do, like you said, if the Olympics, then, and you're 35, you might want to revise your plans. But for something like that, like you can do anything. The past does not equal the future. You don't have to base your current, circumstances and competencies on what you might accomplish in the future. It's just, you decide something, you make the decision, you stay consistent, you make a plan and you follow it. Can do anything. That's just that's how I live my life. And I think that obviously that's how you see things, which is a great attitude and a great mindset to have, especially when you're living with diabetes. I just think that's just something you have to adopt to thrive, if that makes sense. So yeah.
You said spark. That's a good term, because I think if I had to crystallize it, the spark has kind of gone out with me relative to Ironman, not relative to inspiring people and doing great things. But I mean, I went in 8 years, like I said, 8 full-time Ironman, probably 13 half Ironman, 6 marathon. It was like insane. And I think I don't want to say burnt out. That's not the right term, but it was just like, all right. And now having a different kind of job where I'm not paid to be Iron Andy and travel around racing. And it's I don't want to say it's hard to find the time, because I know people who have regular jobs and who train and do Ironman. It's for me, it's the combination of the time, and I think that spark is gone a little bit.
I mean, it's not like, I was gonna say, you had that spark and you kind of obliterated it like 8. Like most people have a spark and like, okay, I'm gonna run 1 Ironman and I'll be good. No, you're like, no, I'm gonna run 8. So I think that that's kind of okay that you're maybe not as passionate about it since you've kind of been there and done that. So yeah, that's awesome. So
I'm sorry, one of those friends that I was talking about before, he referenced the other day that I'm an 8.1 time Ironman finisher, and I chuckled because he was inspired by me to become an Ironman. He came to watch me do Ironman in Wisconsin a number of years ago, and from that point on, he's been, all in. He's actually really good, and he's fast, and we did Ironman New York City together. And then my brother-in-law got inspired, and he said, I want to do an Ironman. He signed up for Lake Tahoe, and I was like, all right, I'll do it with you. And I didn't really want to do a 9th Ironman. I had some real issues with the altitude and swimming, and I didn't finish. I mean, I got 10 minutes into the swim and I couldn't breathe. I felt like someone was choking me, and I was like, I'm out. I've done 8 of these. I have nothing left to prove. So I became a fan and watched those two do it the rest of the day, and even kind of jumped in during the run with my brother-in-law and ran the last, I think, 11 miles with him because he was really struggling. So even though I didn't finish, he has said that he wouldn't have been able to finish if I wasn't right there next to him. So I did start and not finish 1 Ironman.
I think that's quite all right. And just being there for your friends and helping them finish, I mean, that's, a feat in its own, just for someone to be there and be that motivation for the other person to dig deep and get that final push out of them. I mean, I'm sure, like, just for me, I mean, CrossFit's different, but it's similar in the fact that you can be the last person, doesn't matter where you are, you can be the last person finishing the workout. Everybody around you is going to be around cheering you on. Come on, you got this. And just having that, no matter what kind of workout you're doing, you can't believe the difference that makes in your own physical capability. It actually just like ramps you up so much more. So you were there, you played a different role, but I mean, obviously it's still a very important one. So yeah. So cool. So as we do towards the end here, I always ask the people that I'm interviewing to share what they feel their top 3 tips for thriving with diabetes are, and the ones that have worked best for you. What have Andy's top 3 tips for thriving with diabetes been?
Okay, I probably should have thought more about this. I don't have 3 specific, but I can certainly come up with 3 kind of concepts. One, as I pull up my PowerPoint presentation now, one, and it may just seem a little bit vague, but if whoever is listening and paying attention, you'll get this. It's never let diabetes take control of you. I mean, when I was a national spokesperson, it was a campaign called Living Without Limits. But more so than that, it was, this disease can really just bring you to your knees. I mean, it's I don't want to compare it to other chronic diseases, but it's never not there. I mean, it's always, it's right here. And that could really be debilitating. So I've always said, you're going to fall. You're going to have moments of weakness. I can't do this. This isn't fair. But you got to snap out of it, and you're in control. And like I said earlier, break it down into little things. Okay, I can't control my A1C. I can't control my blood sugar always. What can I control? Oh, my attitude. So even kind of talking through that has always been able to like snap me out of any kind of negative feelings or feeling sorry for myself. So it's really just control what you can control. And for me, it's always been my attitude. I've also tried to get people, if I'm able to inspire and motivate people, I want them to kind of pay it forward a little bit. One thing I used to do with my foundation for a couple of years, I had what was called the Iron Andy Challenge, and kids could take part in the Iron Andy Challenge to earn camperships to go to camp, to go to diabetes camps. And one of the things was find one other person, whether it's a newly diagnosed that or a kid in school, and be a mentor and be a leader and a inspiration for them. You're nodding. Is that a good one?
I'm loving that. I'm just so big a fan of. I believe that all of us in the diabetes community who are out here speaking our voice, whatever way each one of us is doing it, the reason that we're doing it is because we all have one similar desire, which is to help other people. And I don't think anybody shares their voice or their story without having that underlying current of, I hope that this, whatever this is going to help inspire somebody else to do something and, you know, pay it forward and mentor and be there. I just think that is the cornerstone. I think that's what's missing out of most people who are what I would say suffering with diabetes versus thriving with diabetes. It may not be, you know, maybe a number of factors, but I think one of the kind of things that needs to be there is consistent, an ongoing conversation with somebody else who lives with diabetes. And that could just be a weekly conversation or, you know, a chat online, but just having that I get it-ness, like where you can, just having somebody else that understands can make all the difference in our ability to thrive. So that paying it forward, like I'm all about that. Living in service to other people is it for me. So, yeah.
Yep. And then the third, and again, it's a little bit vague, but accepting the fact that it's okay to let diabetes get the better of you for a little while. I mean, you know, you have to be careful because if you start to wallow, it like I said, it can bring you to your knees and start to take over. But, you know, we're human. And even when I was at the height of training and doing Ironmans and speaking and, you know, all these what I thought were extraordinary things, every once in a while, the disease would get the better of me. And if you're, I don't know what the right word is, but if you're able to allow that to happen, but then quickly snap back out of it, because if you don't, you're going to crack, I think, in a big way. You can't always be thriving and being the strong one. And, you know, and I think if you're okay with that and you accept that, you know what, I'm going to have a bad day here and there. I'm going to have a couple of bad moments. I'm going to miscalculate a meal and wake up with a 300 blood sugar in the middle of the night. It's going to happen. Don't beat yourself up about it. Just move on. And, you know, I guess if I had to put it into words, it's just the ability to accept the fact that you're human, but then, you know, snap back out of it and start thriving again.
Totally agree. Don't dwell on negativity. I think that's it. I mean, one thing we can choose, it's what we're focusing on. And if you want to a lot of people that are caught in that kind of suffering state are constantly focusing on what they don't want. I don't want these blood sugars. I don't want this. I don't want that. But if we focus on what you said, like you said, you can control your attitude. One thing for me, you know, having had an eating disorder, now I know that I can control what I choose to eat. Before I didn't feel like I could. Now I know that I can. So just having that, and I have tons of conversations with myself. Like you were saying, at least talk to yourself. I talk to myself all the time. Like, oh, well, you know, that looks good right now, but your blood sugars aren't gonna be great. And you're probably not gonna feel really great after you eat it. So is it really worth it? And just have these conversations with yourself. And then I control my choices and then I move on and I feel great about it. And that's a win in the moment. So yeah, a lot of great advice there. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap things up?
You're welcome. No, I mean, I used to tell people just to go to my website, but I mean, if I'm easy to find, if anybody ever wants to.
Yeah. So with these interviews, I will link any and everything, any way that Andy wants you to be able to look at him further, I will link under the YouTube video and I will link it under the blog. So any way so you don't have to worry about, you know, you can say it now, but I'll also link it directly under the video. So
yeah, and I never stopped being Iron Andy. What I mean by that is I make my living now working for Insulet and selling Omnipod, and but what drives me is knowing that I'm still inspiring people, and even though I'm not out there racing anymore, if anybody watching this has been inspired, then that's great. So there's a little piece of Iron Andy still alive. Okay. So I'm easy to find if anybody ever wants to chat or whatever. If you need me to pay it forward, Google awesome. Iron Andy, you'll find me.
All right. I love it. Well, thank you so much. You have such a great attitude and definitely inspiring. You inspired me. I'm sure you're going to inspire other people as well. So thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you sharing all of your insights and your story. And for everyone else out there, thank you for watching. And if you like the video, click the thumbs up and stay tuned for the next episode of Unleash Your Inner Diabetes Dominator. Take it easy, guys.
Thank you. Take care.